Welcome to this night training module offered by Pilot Institute. And in this training module, I'm going to teach you things that you may be able to read on the FAA website afterwards, but I figured that this is probably a lot better to do in videos instead of doing on just a text that you will find on the FAA training. So with that being said, this training doesn't necessarily qualify you to replace the training on the FAA website, but it will provide all the information that you need in order to become night current, and this is something that I wanted to provide to you for free. So please follow all the rest of the videos, and then by the end of it, you'll have access to a quiz, and then you'll basically be ready to go and start flying training at night, as long as you also complete the FAA training. So see you in the course. So night operation, let's talk about some regulatory requirements in order to fly at night. What do you need to do? So this is all effective as of March 1st, 2021. The FAA has changed the regulation. Now remote pilots applicants have to be knowledgeable on night operation. So this is something that I'm going to be teaching you here in this course. The initial exam may contain night operation questions as early as, I should say, March 1st, 2021. So this part of the course is going to prepare you for all of these new questions that you're going to see on the exam. If you are looking for recurrent training, now recurrent training is something that the FAA also adopted in early 2021. If you're already certified and you're looking for the recurrent training from the FAA in order to qualify for the new 2021 night rules, then you must do a bunch of things. The first thing is you need to take the mandatory training, free training, I need to say it's free, on the FAA website. It's recurrent training, and it's available starting in March 1st, 2021, and it's going to be available at FAAsafety.gov. There's going to be a link down in here that you can click and basically go to the FAA website. As an option, this course that you're taking right now, this module, is also available to you to train. It is more interactive than what the FAA is going to give you on the FAAsafety.gov website, but you must also take the FAA training. So this does not replace the FAA training if you are doing this for recurrent training purposes. If you're doing this as an initial, then this does qualify. As recurrent training, it does not. Okay, I want to make that clear right now. Let's talk about some of the night requirements. What do you have to do in order to fly at night after March 16 of 2021? This is a different date than the one we mentioned before. After March 16 of 2021, you need to do one of two things. You need to either pass an initial knowledge test after March 1st, 2021. So if you've taken your initial knowledge exam after March 1st, 2021, then you meet the night requirements because your exam had FAA questions about night in that exam. Possibly could have. Or the other thing that you can do, you can complete the FAA training available online for free after March 1st of 2021. So if you've done one of these two things, then you are theoretically eligible to fly at night without a waiver. Another thing that you need to do is your SUAS, your small unmanned aircraft system, must be equipped with a lighted anti-collision light that is visible from 3 statute miles. The regulation also says that there needs to be a flash rate that is sufficient to avoid a collision. It needs to basically be flashing enough that somebody is going to be able to see it and avoid colliding with your drone. These are the same light requirements that we see during civil twilight. I'll show you a little diagram in a second of how you can do this and when you need to have lights on, but it's actually pretty straightforward in this case. Let's take a look at this timeline right here. Some people like to see this as a timeline, makes it a little bit easier. The regulation was published by the FAA on January 15, 2021. This is the publication date. This is actually important because the FAA in the regulation kind of has a start time, and then after so many days, then things happen. In this case, 45 days after publication, the training is going to become available on the FAA website. So I mentioned already that as of March 1st, 2021, the night training is going to be available on the FAA website. 15 days later, you can start to fly. If you've been trained during that 15-day training period, then you can start to fly as a trained pilot. I'm going to call it this, as a night trained pilot. You can start to fly without a waiver. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. So 316, if anything, if you receive the training, this is the first day, March 16, 2021 is the first day that you can start flying without a waiver if you've done the training. So after this March 16, 2021 date, then what's going to happen is if you fly at night, then you're going to need to have an anti-collision light and all the training required. And then during civil twilight, which is 30 minutes before sunrise, you also need to have a light on your drone. At sunrise all the way to sunset, no need to have an anti-collision light. Then we have sunset, and then we have the period of civil twilight, which ends basically 30 minutes after sunset, and then night. So basically from the time of sunset to the time of sunrise, the entire time you need to have an anti-collision light flashing in there. Now, the important part here with the civil twilight is that until March 16, 2021, during that civil twilight, you can technically fly in there without having a waiver, but don't want to get you too confused right here. Some of you may be asking, what happens if I actually have a daylight waiver, a 107.29 daylight waiver, which is what the FAA gave before this training period, before March 16, 2021. If you had a daylight waiver from way back then it's going to expire on May 15, 2021. So you have the entire time until May 15, 2021. I'm one of these persons, so I can fly until May 15, 2021. And then after this, basically, I have to do the training on the FAA website for free in order for it to not expire. So then I'll be ready to go. Okay, from a regulatory standpoint, those are the things that you need to do. So just remember these dates, 3/1 and 3/15 are pretty important. 3/16, March 16 is the first time that you can fly with nights, with the training and without a waiver at night and with the light. Let's talk about your vision in flight. This is important because we want to take a look first at your eye, and then after this, we're going to take a look at what happens when you fly at night. So your vision obviously is the primary method of orientation that is responsible for actually 80% of all the flight information that you receive. So that's actually a pretty big number. The eye actually works very much like a camera. You're going to be focusing on light. That light is going to come through your lens, through your eye, and then it's going to go to the back of your eye where you have a sensor. Just like your camera, right? Your camera has a lens. The light goes through the lens and then goes to the back of the sensor, and then the information is sent to the brain of the camera. In our case, it's going to be sent to our brain. And the USB cable, if you want, I always call it that, the USB cable between the sensor and our brain is called the optic nerve, and that's what's going to convey the information to our brain in order to be analyzed. One of the downside with our eye is that it can be subject to visual illusions, and it also has a blind spot. So there's a section in the back of our eye that doesn't have any kind of sensors, any kind of way to collect the light, and that's going to be our blind spot. Now, this is a beautiful picture right here of the eye. So the way that it works, the light is going to pass through first the cornea, and this is your cornea right here. Once it's gone through the cornea, it's going to go through the lens. Think about the cornea as kind of a filter, okay? And then the filter goes through the lens, and then from the lens, it's going to go to the sensor in the back of your eye, which is going to be the retina. In the retina, there's two different things that are going to collect the data. Think about them as your photosensor. They're going to capture the information, and then they're going to send it through the optical nerve all the way to your brain. Now we have cones and we have rods. The cones have the highest concentration in the back of your eye. So as I'm looking at the camera right here, as I'm looking at you guys, what I'm using is I'm using my cones in order to get a good image of what is going on. They are able to detect color. They're able to basically help you with your central vision. So the concentration is mostly the cones are going to be in the back of your eye, and on the side of your eye, there's actually very little concentration of cones. The rods are the opposite. The rods are going to be located mainly on the side of your eye. And the good thing about the rods is that they're 10,000 times more sensitive to light than the cones, which means that at night, they're going to be great. Now, we're talking about night operation here, which is why I'm introducing this topic right now. But because of the concentration mostly on the side of the eye, then it means that we're going to be using the rods for our peripheral vision, for looking for something that's off sight. Right here, I'm looking at you, and then I can see that there's other things on the side of our studio right here that when I look straight, I can see what they are, but I don't have really a good representation of what it is because now I'm using my rods that don't have the color, don't have the details that we have with the cones. So far, so good. Now, let's take a look at what happens at night, or actually during the day compared to at night. During the day, I'm looking at my drone and I'm using the back of my eye. I'm using the back of my eye because I'm staring at it directly. What happens is this is the area right here where the cones are going to be active. More cones in the back of my eye. I'm using the cones. I can clearly see my drone. Everything is good. Now let's take a look at what happens at night. At night, that area in the back of my eye becomes a blind spot because my rods are much more sensitive. My cones are not so good. So my cones are not going to be very good at capturing my drone, at seeing exactly in front of me. So instead, we turn to what we call the peripheral vision at night. The rods are going to become active because they're much more sensitive at night, which means that I still can see my drone because I'm staring right at it. So how do I see my drones? Well, the way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to turn my eye. I'm going to turn my head to the side, and now I'm going to be using my peripheral vision. In this case, we turn our head to the left. I'm using my peripheral vision. I'm looking straight right here, but I can see my drone because I'm using my rods in order to do that. Do this in your bedroom tonight. You turn off the lights and then you wait a little bit. There's a period of time, we're going to talk about this in a second, where your eye is going to acclimate to the dark. But if you want to stare directly at an object, then if you want to see it, then you're going to have to move your head a little bit to the side. And then all of a sudden you'll be able to see the object a lot better. So you're just going to keep moving your eyes like this, and then you'll be able to see the object. If you stare right at it, then you're going to be into that night blind spot, and then you won't actually be able to see it. So try it at night and see how it works. And then also the next thing you're going to try is called dark adaptation. Dark adaptation happens because as we get into a dark room, over time, our eyes are going to adapt to the dark. It's called dark adaptation. So I have a little graph right here. Time in the dark at the bottom, and then the sensitivity of our cones and rods on the left side. If we look at our cones are going to become pretty sensitive to get to their maximum sensitivity pretty quickly, okay? You turn off the light, the cones are going to take a few minutes to adapt, and then eventually, that's it. They're going to be as good as they're ever going to be. The rods on the other side are going to go like this. They're going to start very low in sensitivity, but as it gets darker and as we are in the dark longer, then they're going to get to their maximum sensitivity, but it takes time. So after about 7 or 8 minutes, the rods are more sensitive than the cones, which means that after 7 or 8 minutes being in the dark, you need to switch from central vision, the cones, to peripheral vision, the rods, after about 7 minutes. And then after about 25 to 30 minutes, that's when the rods become the most sensitive. That's when you reach maximum efficiency. That's when your night vision is going to be the best that it can be. Okay, so 25 to 30 minutes is about the amount of time you want to be in the dark before that's as good as it's going to get. Now there's a downside to it. There's a downside because you need to protect your vision at night, because what happens is anytime you look at a bright object during the dark adaptation period, what's going to happen is that it's going to reset the entire process. There's actually a chemical process in your eye that bleaches your retina, and that process takes time to get adapted. So every time you look at a bright light, then it goes back to 0. Then you have to wait that other 30 minutes to get back to maximum sensitivity. So you can help with that. You can go and try to get adapted. So to help adaptation at night, try to wear sunglasses if you go inside of a bright building. What it's going to do is going to filter, especially if you have neutral density glasses, it's going to filter the light coming into your retina, and it's going to prevent that bleaching. Now, it's not perfect, but it's still better than looking at a straight bright light. Now, obviously, as I'm recording, I got these 2 lights shining on my face, and this is something that you definitely want to prevent. If there's any kind of bright lights, strobe lights, street lights, car lights, headlights, all of this, you're going to want to turn away from them and not stare at them. This is something that if you're driving, for example, try not to stare at the headlight. Not that it's any possible, but this is something you want to avoid. Also, another tip, if you're flying at higher altitude, I'm not saying the drone flying at high altitude, I'm saying you as the pilot being at a higher MSL, mean sea level altitude, you may want to consider using supplemental oxygen, which is going to help with your vision. Portable canister of oxygen, for example, is going to help you with that. So that's some tips that you can have. Another tip, you're obviously going to be looking at a bright screen, an iPad, a phone, or you're going to have a crystal sky that is really bright. Make sure that you turn the display down as much as possible. Do this before your mission. If you're doing your pre-flight mission and you're in your office, and turn on this thing and then bring it down all the way to the minimum so that when you turn it on the field at night, then it doesn't just brighten your face. Another tip that we use when with airplanes is using a red light or a green light in order to do your pre-flight. I like the red light rather than using a white light. The white light, it's all about wavelength. The green light and the red light have a different wavelength that doesn't affect your retina discoloration nearly as much. So using a red light and a green light, I just buy a light that has a filter and you can change it. They're very popular in aviation. So when you do your pre-flight on the airplane, usually you bring one of these lights. And then if you're using anything, so when I have actually a headlamp that has a little red light on it. So when I go and fly at night, this is what I use. I never use a bright white light. Also, make sure that you don't blind people around you. If you have a team flying at night, lower your headlight, lower your flashlight, and make sure that you don't have that staring in people's face. And obviously, I mentioned this before, but avoid looking at car lights, street lights, and any kind of bright lights out there. That's going to reset your dark adaptation, and then you'll have to wait again 30 minutes or so before it works. Something that I need to mention is coping with stress. Flying at night is different. It's going to be more stressful. It's going to be more tiring than day operation because you're going to have to pay extra attention to pretty much everything around you. So make sure that you understand what is stressful and how you can cope with them. One thing that's stressful that can prevent being focused is drugs and alcohol. You know that drugs, legal or illegal, are going to reduce your visual acuity. They're going to slow your reaction time and mess up with your decision making. So alcohol works the same way. So obviously, those are things that you need to avoid. Again, drugs, legal or illegal. Being exhausted. If you're flying at night, chances are this is outside of your normal sleeping pattern. So you may be at the end of a day and you may not be well rested. The effects of being tired, of exhaustion, are going to mean a slower reaction time and then division of attention. So something that you need to deal with as well. Using tobacco actually increases the carbon monoxide levels inside of your body, which means that there's less red blood cells available to help with your vision. So this is something that you also want to avoid. If you're a tobacco user, something that you want to skip on that specific day. Let's talk about the way that you're going to estimate the distance and then also the depth perception, because this is something that's going to look different at night. A lot harder to figure out distances when you're looking at an object at night or when you're trying to walk in a dark area, and also very difficult to figure out depth perception. And the reason is during the day, you have shadows, you have different colors, you have different textures that you can look at that are going to give you an idea of depth and distances. If you look at something in the distance, a range of mountains, you can see because it's blurry or because it's not nearly as sharp, then you have an idea of how far it is. How much of the details can you see in the distance? Your brain does that automatically. At night, that's all gone. You don't have any of that, which means that it's going to be a lot harder to figure out exactly how far things are. At night, any object is going to appear very uniform, and it's going to be very hard to discern. I'm talking about objects that could be obstacles, that could be things that you can hit. Whether it's a man-made obstacle or it's a mountain or a hill or whatever it is, then this is something that you need to figure out. So I'll give you some tips in a minute on what to do before a night flight so you can be ready for that flight. But there's 4 different illusions that apply to night vision for UAS pilots. Autokinesis, we have false horizon, we have reversible perspective illusion, and we have the flicker vertigo. So I want to talk about these individually and give you tips on how you can avoid them. But the first one is called autokinesis. And autokinesis happens when you stare at a single bright light in the distance. And if there's a dark background, Does that sound familiar, right? You have a bright light with a dark background. That sounds just like your drone or even an aircraft that's flying nearby. After about 8 to 10 seconds, what's going to happen is that that object is going to start to move. That light is going to be perceived as if it's moving, and it may not be moving. And that's the problem, is that your brain is kind of messed up and your vision is messed up, so it doesn't have the ability to give you the right cues. And if you have a camera that has autofocus and you try to focus on an object in the dark, that camera is going to have a very hard time. It's going to go back and forth, back and forth. The image is going to be blurry, not blurry, blurry, not blurry. The same thing kind of happens with your eye that creates this autokinesis. So one way to do it is you try to focus your eye at different distances. And when you do that, then your eye is going to try to adapt and adjust so that it can basically find the right distance to focus on that object. Easier said than done, quite frankly. And also, if you try, one way to avoid autokinesis, obviously, is to try to avoid staring at an object for more than 10 seconds. So try to divide your attention. Try to go back to your controller maybe and then look up again so you can see the difference between the two. So here's a little example right here of autokinesis, and then that object is going to be moving around. Another one is called false horizon, and as a student pilot, when I learned to get my license and I flew in Florida with the airplanes, this is something that I actually experienced, and the reason is I was flying eastbound. That's where I was located in Florida, and at one point when Florida is extremely flat, you can see in the distance, you can see the ocean, and then you can see a whole bunch of lights and clouds and everything. What happens with false horizon is that there's a line of lights, okay, that line up and create what's called a false horizon. It makes you think that a certain straight line is actually the horizon, which can be very tricky. So what happened to me is that in the distance, there was a city, and the city, the way the lights were lined up, they were one after the other instead of being all of them in the horizon. So what it did is it tilted the horizon. And then because I was looking at it, I thought, hey, it looks like all these lights are basically lined up. And I started turning, and as I started turning, I thought, my brain was convinced that these lights were basically the actual horizon. And then after a while, took a few minutes, but I realized that I was actually starting to turn to the left. It's a very gentle turn. You actually don't feel it in your brain. Now, I know you guys are not training to be airplane pilots, but it's just to give you an idea of what that actually feels like. So I corrected, I looked at my instruments, and then I knew exactly what was going on. But if you have hills or if you have lights in the distance, if you're in the middle of nowhere and then you start to see lights in the distance, maybe on top of a hill, then they can actually create the illusion of false horizon. Now, this is going to be a little bit harder to fall for, if you want, as an illusion when you're on the ground, but it can still mess up your brain and make you think things that are not actually happening. So you just got to be careful. If you're flying on the beach and you're flying over the water at night, if there's a bunch of boats in the distance, they could actually line up to create a false horizon and just give you this. It's just a very weird sensation when it happens. And here's an example. This is a picture that you would see during the day. Okay, you're looking outside. You can see the hills, you can see the mountains in the background. But at night, if there were lights on top of this mountain, if you look at it from a distance, you could think that this would be a horizon. So now that's going to mess up your vision and kind of gives you false clues. So just something to remember. The next one is called reversible perspective illusion. And this one is interesting. This happens when you're looking at an aircraft, for example, and you're looking at a bunch of lights on the aircraft. And it may look like the airplane is actually moving away from you when it's actually coming closer. Remember, at night or during the day, it doesn't matter. You have to give way to other aircraft and that are flying in the airspace, which means that at night you still need to be paying attention to other aircraft that are flying so that you can give way to them if they get into your airspace. So as you're observing an aircraft, there's a way that you can actually figure out which way they're coming. Are they coming closer to you or going further away from you? And this will allow you to figure out in any circumstances which way an airplane is actually going. So let me kind of name the lights that we have in here. We have a beacon light on top of the tail of the aircraft, and that's going to be a beacon. It's a flashing red light, kind of like what you would see at an airport at night when the airport is blinking, is just flashing. Then we have a landing light. That landing light typically is going to be turned on close to airports, and that light, it's just a bright light. Sometimes there is one on both sides, so you may be able to see that on both sides of the airplane. Bright white light in the front. And then on each side, we have our strobe light, and that strobe light is going to be flashing, okay? And that's a flashing white light, very much like what you would put on your drone as a flashing white light, strobe light, in order to tell people where you are. On each tip, on each wingtip, there's also what we call a nav light, navigation light. And these are not flashing, they're steady lights. And on the left tip, then we have, on the left wing tip, we have a red light, and on the right wing tip, we have a green light, and that's standard. So anytime that you're gonna be seeing one of these lights, if you're looking at lights that are coming towards you, and you see a red light on the right side and a green light on the left side, then it basically means that the airplane is approaching. And if you see a red light on the left side and a green light on the right side, then it means the airplane is flying away from you. On the tail section at the bottom, typically there is this white light that's only pointing towards the back of the airplane. So that's part of the navigation light. So with this piece of information right here, you should be able to basically adapt. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I teach this for my private pilots, and these questions are fairly confusing in the FAA database on the exam. If the FAA happens to put these questions on the FAA exam, then you're gonna have to really pay attention to this section right here. So that's all I want to say right now. The next thing that we have is called flicker vertigo, and flicker vertigo happens with flashing lights. And this is also something that I've experienced as an instrument student in the airplane. I've never had this issue flying at night with a drone, but I'm not saying it can't happen. But the strobe light that's on the back of the airplane, if you get inside of a cloud, if you rate it to fly inside of a cloud with an airplane, then this flashing light is going to go and then reflect inside of the cloud, and it makes it look like you're in a nightclub, and that can actually mess up with your brain quite a bit. So the same thing could happen on the ground if you're watching another airplane or if you're watching a drone flying around. So that can make you sick and give you vertigo, which is why we call it flicker vertigo. So something to keep in mind. You can get away with it by basically just looking away. If you start to get dizzy or whatever, or start to get sick because of that flicker, then just look somewhere else and then look again, and then that should help. So just don't stare at those flashing lights. Let's take a look at some tips for flying at night. And I try to go through all of my experience of flying at night and put all of these together. I'm sure there's more tips. Feel free to share them if you have a good tip in the comment section so others can see it. But essentially, the first thing is planning, planning, planning. And I cannot say this enough. Flying at night is not the same as flying during the day. And it's going to be bringing a lot more challenges, and you need to be ready for it. So this is not something that you do on a whim. You need to be planning. You need to figure out what's going to be around the area where you're going to fly, but you have to be ready. So one of the first planning things that you want to do is plan for emergencies and make sure that you're going to be briefing your crew if you're bringing a crew with you. I'll talk about an emergency on the next few slides, where I talk about the fact that you lost sight of your drone, which is kind of the worst thing that can happen at night. So when that happens, then I'll be briefing you on what to do. But another tip, make sure that you charge your strobe lights. Make sure that you also have a backup. There's different types of strobe lights that you can get, and I'll show you a few in a second that I use personally, but make sure that they're charged before you take off. Also, make sure that you know where the potential obstacles may be by looking at a sectional chart or using any other resources that you have available online. I live in an area where you have tall trees, we have a lot of hills, we have a lot of mountains and power lines. That's another thing that you could be encountering. Power lines are going to be almost impossible to see at night. So you need to make sure you know where they are. So look at sectional charts, look at topo maps if you want to see the relief in the area that you are, or even better, plan to have a day visit to the site so you can see the hazard. Make a map of where you're going to fly. Take a mental picture. Take an actual picture even. Try to even do the flight that you may do later on at night so that you can see exactly where the drone is going to go and what's going to happen. So find out if there's going to be any landmarks that are going to be lit, if there's going to be a house on the top of a hill maybe, or if there's going to be a flashing obstacle. You can see those on a sectional chart, for example. Just become aware of what is going on in that area when you're going to be flying. Another thing that you need to do is make sure that you set your RTH altitude. RTH, return to home. Now this is true of any operation, but especially when you fly at night. You want to make sure that if something happens, you know where the drone is going to go and you know what the drone is going to do. Another thing I'm going to add that's not on the slides right here, but not only set your altitude, but also understand how RTH works. RTH works differently on different drones, but not only that, it works differently depending on the conditions. DJI drones have usually a bubble of, I think it's 65 feet. It depends on the drone, but most of them past 65 feet, the behavior is going to be different than if you are within 65 feet. We actually talk about this in our deep dive course. Those are free courses. We have deep dive courses for the mini series and then for the Mavic series. So make sure that you go. If you want to learn how it works, make sure you go into these courses or just head over to your manual and then read the manual. It explains everything in there. Something to remember, when you fly at night, your camera inside of your drone is going to be of very little use because it's not really going to be able to see unless the area is well lit. If you're flying in the dark, then you won't be able to see stuff. I love to use my drone at night to do light painting, for example. And of course, when I go light painting, I go in areas that have zero light anywhere. And so when I take off, I'm using 100% visual line of sight. My screen is pretty much useless other than using the telemetry, which is the next bullet right here. I'm relying 100% on the telemetry for distance, for height, but also I'm using 100% visual line of sight in order to make sure that I can see the drone. And that's my next tip. Remain within visual line of sight. More than ever, make sure that you stay within visual line of sight. And if you don't, then you're going to have a contingency plan, something that you need to be able to do in case something happens. Know the height of all the tall obstacles in your area. I mentioned this a little bit before, but make sure that you know what's the highest obstacle in the area. That's going to help you to set your RTH altitude. Also, if you have bright lights, I use the Lume Cubes. I'm not affiliated with them, but Lume Cubes, they're very bright. I have 2 of them. I have a little mount that I can put on my Mavic 2 Pro, and I can use that actually to do light painting. So, but those are great to light up the area underneath you as a floodlight. If you're using the Mavic Enterprise, you can also use the floodlight on the Mavic Enterprise. So there's different options, but it's always good to have light to not only be visible, but also to look down on the ground. Visual observers are not required at night if you're flying without a waiver. So that's kind of part of the new rules that came out in 2021. You don't need a visual observer anymore, but I want you to use your brain and to use your aeronautical decision making in order to use a visual observer if you need one. If you can, block off the area where you're going to fly. Try to make sure people avoid the area. It may be harder at night to see people. It may be harder at night to avoid flying on top of them. So that's something that you want to make sure you're doing correctly. Related to flying over people, make sure that you have a plan to avoid flying over people. They're going to be harder to see, like I said, and especially if you're going to be flying a little bit of a distance, then make sure that you can stay away from flying on top of them. And of course, because you're flying at night doesn't mean that other people are not flying at night, including helicopters, including low-flying aircraft. And this is something that you need to continue doing. You need to continue monitoring for traffic. That's why having a visual observer is a great idea when you fly at night. So Something that's tricky, and I'll talk a little bit about this in a minute, but know which frequency you need to use when a tower is closed. If you're flying near an airport, it doesn't mean that other people are not landing at the airport, even if the tower is closed. And I'll repeat that as well, but make sure that you know which frequency you need to monitor. Typically, if you are flying near a controlled airport and the control tower shuts down, then that tower frequency is the same. It becomes a CTAF, Control Traffic Advisory Frequency. That CTAF frequency is what you need to listen to, okay? Because the tower is closed doesn't mean the airport is closed. People are still flying at night at airports using airplanes and helicopters. Let's talk about the situation where Let's talk about this situation where you're going to fly and you lose visual line of sight at night. And this can be pretty dramatic, okay? This can be pretty traumatic, I should say. This is something that you really need to be ready for because it can happen. So if you lose visual line of sight at night, at any time, if you lose your SUAS, there's several reasons why it could happen. You could be behind an obstacle. So if you're behind you and in a mountain, for example, or another object, then, or maybe you were flying pretty tall and then all of a sudden you went over a bunch of trees and now the trees are between you and the drone. Doesn't mean that you crash, but you could be just losing. There's something that's blocking the vision. You could be entering a cloud or fog. If that's the case, you will likely still see the drone flashing, but it's going to become blurry and then it's going to light up the entire cloud or the entire fog. Obviously, you shouldn't be flying in there because you've watched the weather before you took off and you made sure that you're not going to be flying in an area that has these. But fog builds up at night. It can build up pretty quickly. So it's something that even if it's clear when you take off, doesn't mean it's going to be clear forever. So if you're near an area that has water, for example, it's something to consider. It could also be that you crashed into terrain or you crashed into a structure. So we'll talk about what you need to do if this is one of these things. Another thing that could have happened is the fact that your anti-collision light could have failed or even fallen off from your drone. So it's something that you need to be ready for. So let's take a look. What would you do if one of these things happened? The first thing that you need to do is you need to stop moving. All right, you need to stop moving forward immediately because if you lost signal, because you went behind a tree or because, well, if you hit something, then it's too late. But if you lost your light, then you need to eventually come back. So stop moving immediately. Verify that there's actually a connection with your UAS. Take a look at your controller, see if you still have telemetry, see if you still have your camera. Maybe you can move the camera around to see around you and maybe get an idea of where you're located. If it's safe and if it's legal, start to climb. As soon as you start climbing, if you're behind an object, behind an obstacle, then you'll be able to see your drone. Try to look for the aircraft lights. Don't go forward, don't go back just yet. Just go up and see if you can see the drone. If you're using a VO, send them to the location. Ask them to start walking towards where the last known area was and see if they can locate the aircraft. Also, try to listen, okay? At night, things are going to be a little bit more quiet. You should be able to listen to it and try to locate where the drone is and hopefully be able to get a better idea of where to go. If the anti-collision light has failed, then you need to RTH immediately. As a matter of fact, if any of these things happen and you can't get visual on the aircraft, just hit RTH, hope that you set it up correctly, and then hopefully the aircraft will come back. If you have visual again, then I would land and then kind of investigate and figure out why you lost visual line of sight so that doesn't happen again when you take off again. Let's go ahead and talk about your strobe lights. And your strobe lights, first off, you want to make sure that they're visible from 3 statute miles. Now, I brought the Inspire 2 right here. You can see there's a light right here. I just turn it on by just tapping on it. This is the light, and I usually don't have the little red thing on top of it. This is Velcroed on top right here. I usually don't use the colored one. I just have it just as a white light on top. And this is technically supposed to be visible from 3 statute miles. So the manufacturer tells you, you can also test it if you want. I also use these these lights right here. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I actually don't know the brand for these the brand for these lights, but they're actually pretty bright as well. I think they're actually brighter than the lights from LumeCube, and I have 2 of them. So I have them on the edges right here of the drone, one on each side, on the Inspire 2. Just because, and I use 3, quite frankly, just because I want to be more visible. There's nothing wrong with that. I like to have these actually turned to the side when I fly during the day, just so I can be seen. At night, I'm going to put them up so that other people can see me. Remember, this is something that's actually very important. These lights can be of any color, and you can have as many of them as you want. Now, if you're going to put colored lights, I recommend the green and the red, and I recommend that you follow the red light on one side and then the green light on the other side, like I showed you on the previous slide. Another thing to remember is that these lights are not really designed for you to see the drone. They're designed for you to be seen by other aircraft. That's really the key and the reason why we have anti-collision light, anti-collision, to prevent a collision. So that's where I would put them. That's what I would do. If you're flying a smaller drone, for example, this is the Mavic 2 Pro that I use quite a bit, I would put it right on top right here as well. Okay, so then it's highly visible right on top. Now, some people have asked me, the drones that have a light at the bottom right here, landing light, that does not qualify for 3 statute miles. It's just merely a light to light up the bottom. Doesn't mean you can use that to be visible to yourself, but that doesn't qualify as the strobe light. So put one on top, at least one on top. If you have a larger drone like the Inspire 2, just put more of them. More light you have, the more visible you're going to be. So that's pretty cool. The next thing I want to talk about is how you're going to request submissions to be flying at night. And this becomes a little tricky because the FAA is still working on this process. But at the time I'm recording this, first off, there is no request necessary in uncontrolled airspace. That's not going to change. As long as you meet all the requirements we highlighted before, you should be ready to go. If you're flying in Class B, C, D, or E2, E2 being the Class E that starts at the surface and is primary to the airport, then you will need to request approval to fly at night. You do not do this in Lance. Lance does not have the capability at the moment to do night flights. You will go in the FAA drone zone, you will submit your application, and you will be ready to go and fly at night. Okay? So that's one of the limitations at the moment. Something that you need to worry about, I shouldn't say worry about, but something that you need to consider is which airspace am I going to be flying in? And you're going to say, well, I can go on the FAA website and I can figure out, or I can go on the sectional chart and I can figure out exactly what airspace I'm in. Yes, but many controlled airports around the country are uncontrolled when the tower goes off. When the tower is no longer in operation, then we're going to be flying an uncontrolled airport. So you need to determine what the airspace is going to become after the tower is closed. I'm going to give you 2 examples in a second, and then you can look around you and then find out what actually is going on. But I'm going to give you the tools of how you're going to find which airspace you're going to be in at night, at night or whenever the tower closes. So remember, this is something that's important. You need approval from the FAA in order to fly in Class B, C, D, or E2. Not E4, which we're going to look at in a second, only E2, okay? E 700 feet, E 1200 feet does not count. You don't need approval to fly in there. Only when the Class E is at the surface and is primary to the airport, not an extension. So let's take a look. This is my home airport, Prescott, Arizona. And the airport here, as I'm going to give you a few seconds to kind of take a look at it, tell me what kind of airspace this is. Okay, there's 2 different airspaces in here that we need to look at. The first one is this one right here. This is a Class D airspace, okay, the dashed blue line. And then on the bottom left corner on the southwest of the airport, we have a Class E. Now this is a Class E starting at the surface, but it's an extension of Class Delta, which means that it is considered E4. Okay, Class E4. Now, in here, during the day, this is just during the day, I'm going to need to get approval to fly in this area using Lance or the FAA drone zone when I'm flying in Class Delta. The Class E4 right here does not require approval because only Class E2 of the Class E needs approval. So far, so good. Let's move on to this example right here. In that legend right here, we see there's a star, pretty big star. This means that there's part-time operation at this airport. You're going to say, what does that mean? Well, it means that the tower eventually is going to close. There's a control tower. And when that tower closes, then we're going to go here to the chart supplement. And in the chart supplement, we can scroll all the way to the bottom. And you'll see right here, it says airspace is class D. Service from 1300 Zulu to 0500 Zulu. So we're going to have to do some math right here. And then find out that it's actually 6 a.m. Until 10 p.m., 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Other times, class E. So this reverts to class E when we're done. So let's go back to the chart. Let's take a look. So now what happens is that this class D right here now becomes a class E. And because it's primary to the airport, it becomes a class E2. And guess what? This little extension right here, because now it's no longer really an extension of class D, it's an extension of class E. It's also a class E2 because now it's also primary to the airport. Imagine this whole entire area right here is all one giant class E2. What does that mean in terms of approval? It means that I need to fly in there. If I need to fly at night, I need to request approval via the FAA drone zone. Remember, not available on lands at the moment to fly in that class E2 after the tower closes. If I want to fly in Prescott at night in any of this area highlighted right here, then I need to have, I need to go into the FAA drone zone, submit a request, and then I'll be able to fly after the tower closes. All right, let's take a look at a tool that you may be more familiar with. And let's take a look at this right here, which is Kitty Hawk. And in Kitty Hawk, I picked any location. Now you notice in Kitty Hawk, we only see one big circle. That big circle is class D airspace. And you notice that there's actually no extension, that extension class E4 that we see during the day, it's not in there. So if I click on any of the area in the class D airspace, I can see that it's class D. So far, so good. That's pretty simple. Now, if I click in the area that I know is a class E4, look what it says. It says class E2. What this is telling me is that after hours, that class airspace becomes class E2. Now you notice it doesn't say that it's class E4. As a matter of fact, it used to in Kitty Hawk, and I think they removed it because they were getting people confused. But it's still showing you right here. And also what it says legal description references NOTAM. Basically what it's saying is that this area is activated by a NOTAM, notice to airmen. That notice to airmen is what we read in the in that section where it basically tells us that this becomes a class E2. But it's tricky because see right here, you would look at Kitty Hawk and you'd be like, I can fly at night. There's nothing depicted. In reality, there's actually a class E2 that would become active at night, and it's something that you would have to pay attention to. So that's why it's always good to look at more than one source of information when you look at this. Now you're going to say it should all be the same. It should all be available in the same place, but I like to look at the sectional. I like to look at this. I like to look at the ArcGIS information from the FAA, the facility map, I call it, just to get a good idea. That's part of your pre-flight, right? That's part of your pre-flight inspections before you're going to go fly. Make sure you know the airspace. Now here's another example. This is Winslow, Arizona, not far from Prescott. And I like this airport because it is a class E2, which means it's primary to the airport, which means that in this case, to fly there during the day, I need to request approval either via a lens provider or via the FAA drone zone. Let's take a look at what happens to this area at night. Here's Winslow. We scroll down a little bit, and then at the bottom it says airspace, class E, service from 1100 Zulu to 0600 Zulu. Other times, class Golf. Perfect. Now I can go back right here. This entire area now become class Golf, which means it's uncontrolled, which means that I don't need to get approval via the FAA drone zone in order to fly there at night. Is that clear? I hope it is. Leave any questions down here. If it's class Charlie, if it's class Bravo, you need to go to the airport and figure out in the chart supplement, figure out what that airport does at night, what the airspace actually becomes. If we look at this airport in Kitty Hawk, you see right here that it says class E2. Now it doesn't really tell you at night what it's going to be. The point I'm trying to get across right here is that Kitty Hawk is great during the day because it's a lens provider and it's going to tell you what you need to do during the day. When you fly at night, the tools are a little bit different, and it's something that you need to pay extra attention because Kitty Hawk may not have all of the information available. All right, so right now what I want you to do is head over to the next lecture. That's where you're going to have a quiz. This quiz, I recommend everyone takes it. If you're studying for the initial exam, you definitely need to do it. If you're studying as a recurrent training and you're just doing this for fun to get additional information before you head over to the FAA training, then take the quiz as well. This will test your ability and make sure that you actually understood what I talked about in here. But these are the type of questions that you will see on the actual FAA exam at the very end, and something that you basically need to be current with. All right, thank you for watching. Now that you're done with this section, remember this does not replace the FAA training. You still have to go on the FAA website to complete the FAA training on FAAsafety.gov. And reminder, make sure that in order to fly at night without a waiver after March 16 of 2021, you need to have completed either an initial written exam, which you have training received through this course, and then you have access to the questions after March 1st of 2021. So if you took your exam after this, then you qualify already for the night training. You can fly without a waiver. If you already have your license, you have to complete the free online recurrent training with the FAA after March 1st, 2021, so that you can start flying after 3/16/2021. Don't take the training early and then go fly at night, because you won't be current, okay? That only works after 3/16/2021. So with that being said, leave any comments you have in below the video, and then I'll be happy to answer your questions, and thanks for watching.